Periodically throughout this podcast, I'll introduce concepts or entities that are founded in folklore and urban legends, many of which are stories passed down from generation to generation. Some of them are ancient in nature, old stories used by parents to get children to behave. Others are stories told from those who have come face to face with these beings and have either escaped with their lives or were set free to tell the story. Either way it is, the stories of these entities are frightening and can certainly be convincing. In part 1 of this episode, we're going to cover the story of a Latin American woman who committed such a horrible act that she was denied entry into heaven. For the second part, we'll explore the origins of an entity that continues to haunt children around the world to this day. So stay with us, because these stories are coming up. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of the Insidious Agenda podcast. As always, I'm your host Nick, and on this week's episode, we're going to dip into our first iteration of the folklore appendices. In this first part, we explore the stories of La Llorona and the Bogeyman. Ensure you're subscribed to this podcast so you don't miss any of our weekly episodes. Now, it's time to turn out your lights, close your eyes, let things go quiet, and just listen for a moment. Maybe you're alone. Maybe you're not. Now follow along to the sound of my voice, and let's get into our story. There are two known stories for the origin of La Llorona that come from Mexico as far back as 1519. In the first, she gave birth to 2 boys whom she loved like any mother would. She also had a husband with whom she was very happy. As she grew older, her husband began to fall out of love with her. However, he still retained his affection for their sons. As this legend has it, one day the woman caught her husband in bed with a younger woman. This caused her to be overcome with grief and anger. She struggled with these feelings, but unfortunately they would get the better of her. To punish her husband, the woman drowned both of their sons in a river, and then herself. When she arrived at the gates of heaven, she was denied entry due to what she had done. She was then cast into hell. While there, she was tricked by the fallen angel called Ramiel. Ramiel would tell her that her sons' souls were lost, but she would have the chance to redeem herself. for she would be granted entry into the kingdom of heaven if she found their souls and brought them back to heaven where they belonged. The trickster knew that her sons' souls were already in heaven, so the poor woman would be damned to wander the earth looking for her sons for all eternity, for which she would cry and weep for the sins that she committed. She was no longer able to overcome her grief and desperation, and she just wished to die and be at peace. Because of this, she started taking other children's souls, drowning them as she had done to her sons, which she continues to do to this day. The second known story of La Llorona is a bit more personalized and is recounted as the following. In a rural village in Mexico, there lived a beautiful young woman named Maria. Maria had grown up being very poor, but had the love of her family. She was well known throughout her small village for her beauty and grace. Her beauty was so marvelous that she captured the attention of both rich and poor men alike. She would often spend her nights in town, where she would wear her best white gown to give onlookers an extra thrill. Maria loved the extra attention that she was paid. One day, a wealthy man of nobility came riding through her village, and the sight of Maria stopped him dead in his tracks. He had traveled far and wide, but had never seen someone so beautiful as her. This rider was absolutely smitten. He decided that he would win over Maria's affection. Maria was just as easily swooned by the young rider as he was with her beauty. Eventually, he would propose to Maria, and she would accept without so much as a second thought. When they were married, Maria would give birth to 2 sons. As life went on, she began to seek her husband more and more. He was on the road traveling and would come home infrequently, but when he did, he had no interest in spending time with his family. Moreover, when he did, he had only eyes for his children, and he cast his wife aside. This would cause her to grow a great deal of resentment towards her own sons. She had begun to feel the inevitable, that her husband was falling out of love with her, which she believed was due to her getting older. One day, after returning from one of his trips, Maria went to go and greet her husband. She noticed then that her husband had returned with a younger, more elegant woman. It was then that he bid farewell to his children and ignored his wife. Maria was so overcome with feelings of anger and betrayal that she took her sons to the river and drowned them in a fit of absolute rage. Later, when she realized what she did, she began to search for her sons. She looked everywhere, far and wide, high and low, but she was too late, for the river had already carried her children away. This is where Maria's story diverges into 2 different directions. Some say that her husband returned home asking to see their children. Maria started to weep, and she told him that she had drowned them. Her husband would become instantly furious and told her that she could not be with him unless she found their children. In another version, Maria was so overcome with emotion that she ran into town screaming and weeping, which did not relent. It was by the town that she was then given the nickname La Yorona, or the Weeping Woman. She would mourn her children day and night. She did not eat and would walk the riverbank in her white gown in search of her children, hoping they would come back to her. As she roamed the riverbanks, her gown began to grow soiled and torn. Because she refused to eat, she became very thin and frail and had begun to appear taller. Due to the malnutrition, and possibly from a broken heart, Maria would die along the banks of the river. Not long after her passing, the restless spirit of Maria would begin to appear again. She would walk the banks of the Santa Fe River at the onset of night. Her cries began to become curses, and the local people of her village began to dread nightfall. She could be seen moving between the trees near the shoreline or traveling with the current. Her name, Maria, eventually became lost to the town, and she began to be known exclusively as La Llorona. The children of the village were warned not to go out after dark, else La Llorona may take them to their deaths. Whichever story of Maria is true, her purpose remains the same. She will be in search of her children for all eternity. It's said that if you hear the cries of La Llorona, you're to run the opposite way. For the cries may bring great misfortune and certain death. Among her weeping, she has been believed to say, "Ay, mis hijos," which translates to, "Oh, my children." It's been reported by people who have encountered La Llorona that when they come into contact with her, she will always ask, "Donde están mis hijos?" or "Where are my sons?" La Llorona may also kidnap children who wander at night, as it's believed she mistakes them for her own sons. Every day, she begs to God in heaven for forgiveness for what she has done, but in order to rest, she needs to find her children. Much like she did with her own sons, any children she comes across, she drowns. It's believed that some of her other victims are cheating husbands. Those who claim to have seen La Llorona say that she appears at night or very late in the evening, often near lakes or rivers. She is adorned in a white gown with a veil. Those who do not see her but have heard her cries are believed to be marked for death. She appears and disappears through bodies of water, searching their depths for her children. One interesting feature of La Llorona is that when her wails seem like they're very close, she is in fact quite far away. But when they are far, take heed, for she is close. The story of La Llorona has sparked a great number of publications, and even the movie that was released in theaters, aptly titled The Curse of La Llorona. In an interview with Bustle magazine, Patricia Velasquez, the actress who plays Patricia Alvarez in the film, had this to say about the legend. "I'm Venezuelan, but I grew up in Mexico, and La Llorona is very real for us. We grew up with her, and it's really how our parents made us do what they wanted us to do. They would say things like, 'Make sure you have to come in by 5, or else La Llorona is going to come and get you.' There are many theories of how the story of La Llorona came to be. It is believed that the earliest written documentation can be traced to 1550, with roots in stories from the ancient Aztecs. There is much written in her legend that may be connected to the legend of the Hungry Woman, for she too was a wailing woman, crying out in search of food rather than children. The matriarchal side of the story could possibly be compared to Chihuahua, who is the Aztec goddess of motherhood. The reference to seeking her children, she can be closely compared to Tonantzin, a monster that devours sin. To wrap up her story, La Llorona is a deeply rooted figure in Mexican and Central American culture. Largely, she is a figure for parents that need to get their children to behave. She has been such a popular folk legend that every year in Mexico City since 1993, a play takes place on the Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead, titled La Huacot Leyenda de la Llorona. If you can learn anything from the story of La Llorona, it's that if you're traveling near water, near dark, or the middle of the night, and you hear the sound of weeping, don't think, run far, run fast, back the way you came. If you don't heed that warning, you might just meet La Llorona. The second of our appendices that we're going to examine today is that of an entity that goes by many names. Babao, Butsaman, El Coco, the Sackman, Baba Yaga, or as it's more commonly known to us in North America, the Bogeyman. The root word for the entity, bogey, originated in the mid-19th century and was originally used as a pseudonym for the devil. From culture to culture, and in different regions of the world, the Boogeyman usually goes by a different name, although quite a few similarities can be spotted throughout the stories. Normally, the Boogeyman is depicted as an imposing and terrorizing entity. They are said to have long claws, talons, and razor-sharp teeth, but they have also been known to have horns, hooves, and some may even appear insect-like. The entity is believed to be ethereal, a spirit, although some are depicted as demons, witches, or other creatures of the occult. The stories usually share common traits as well. Their main purpose is to scare or punish children who act out or misbehave. They are often prone to violence, which owes to the belief that they are there to punish. Some iterations of the Boogeyman legend also have the Boogeyman existing to protect the innocent. However it goes, their legend usually teaches lessons to children. Some of the lesser Boogeyman exist to frighten children, while those that are more violent are said to kidnap them in their sleep or even devour their child victims. It's hard to pinpoint exactly where the story of the Boogeyman originated, but most believe they're closely tied to the 16th century English legend of hobgoblins. Hobgoblins were creatures that lived to torment humans, and even like people, some were relatively harmless, playing simple pranks, while others were more malevolent. In order to give you a true idea of what the Boogeyman looks like in cultures across the world, we'll examine an origin story or two from each continent. We'll start with Africa. The Abu Rigal Masluka, or the man with the burnt or skinned leg, is a common story told by parents to children in Egypt. There, the entity exists as a monster who was burned when he was a child because he did not listen to his parents. Now, the Abu Rigal Masluka comes to grab naughty children who misbehave so he can cook them and eat them. In South Africa, it exists as Tokolosh, described as a dwarvish creature who can be conjured up by healers. Here, The entity largely exists to cause mischief and scare children, but also has the ability to visit women in their sleep. In Europe, it looks very different depending on which country you come from. In Germany, it is known as der schwarze Mann, or the black man, and no, this is not a reference to the color of its skin, more so for its penchant for hiding in dark places, such as closets, under the bed, or even in forests. The Germans even have a game called Wer hat Angst vorm schwarzen Mann, or Who is Afraid of the Black Man. In Italy, l'uomo nero exists as a black man or black ghost without legs. Its main purpose is to scare children who don't want to sleep. Other aliases of the spirit in other European countries are Bolima in Switzerland, Bok in Serbia, Le Croque-Mitaine in France, and even the well-known Baba Yaga in Russia. And no, they're not talking about John Wick, even though, if you recall, that's who you send to kill the Bogeyman. In Asia as well, the Bogeyman takes on many different names. In Japan, the Namahage are demons who warn children not to be lazy or cry. During their Namahaga Seto Matsuri, or the Demon Mask Festival, children don the masks of the Namahaga and pretend to be the spirits. In Indonesia, it exists as Wewe Gombel, a ghost that kidnaps children who are mistreated by their parents. She keeps the kidnapped children in her nest atop a palm tree, but does not cause any harm to them. She acts as more of a grandmother figure until the parents realize the error of their ways. When the parents ask for their children back, they are simply returned, unharmed. In the Middle East lies a very malevolent and dangerous entity. In Pakistan, it is known as the Mama. It is described as an imposing ape-like creature who lives in the mountains and comes forth to kidnap young women. It takes them back to its cave, where it licks the palms of their hands and the soles of their feet, causing paralysis and rendering them unable to escape. In Saudi Arabia, the Dujaira, or Umna al-Gola, or Our Mother the Monster, scares children who misbehave or walk alone. South Americans are familiar with the moniker the Sack Man. This entity carries off children that he throws into a sack. If not known as the Sack Man, other common names are Bicho Papao, the Eating Beast, or the Saranko, the Deep-Voiced Man. The differences between the Sack Man and the others is that Sack Man can arrive during the day, whereas the others are nighttime terrors. The Sack Man is said to kidnap those children who go places without their parents' permission, while the Bicho Papao scares naughty children and will hide under beds or in closets, or even on the roof. Other names in this region are the Tata Duende in Belize, or La Tulevia in Panama, whose legend sounds similar to that of La Llorona. Finally, we come to North America, and I'll include parts of Oceania here as they too believe in the legend of the Bogeyman. This version is an entity that comes to scare children who misbehave. In my own family, the alias of the Bogeyman has simply gone by the moniker of the Man and was used to scare my cousins into behaving when they were young. Largely, there is no one set way for the Bogeyman to act or appear. Their legends span the globe with different appearances, desires, and names. Nonetheless, they are usually centered on children who act up or misbehave and may or may not be violent. As a curious young child, believing what your parents tell you, you could certainly believe that there is an entity that would come to scare you if you misbehaved. The Bogeyman itself plays into the hands of absolute terror. It lives in traditional places that horror movies and books have taught us to be afraid of. Places like the closet, or under your bed. The story twists its way into your imagination so that you can't put a face to it, but you're absolutely terrified nonetheless. As a closing thought, and one that certainly seems to make sense, all of these tales of folklore and urban legends, are they simply a story with morals for children? Or, on a more disturbing and terrifying note, do some of these things actually exist? In some way, shape, or form, the Bogeyman may be out there. We have no way of knowing for sure, but the lasting impact remains into adulthood. Laying in the dark, in your bed, getting ready to sleep after a long day. Sometimes your mind can't help but wander. You've just closed your eyes, and you can't help but think, is there something really hiding in your closet or under your bed? Are you truly alone? Or are you about to meet the entity known as the Bogeyman? If you're hearing this message, then that means you made it to the end of this week's story and the first of our folklore appendices that told the tales of La Llorona and the Bogeyman. I'd like to thank you very much for listening and hope you enjoyed this episode. For more information about the podcast, please visit our links in the show notes and remember to subscribe so you don't miss any of our weekly episodes. If you like this episode, please tell a friend about the Insidious Agenda podcast. If you would like to show your support, donations can be made to our PayPal account in the link tree. New episodes are released every Tuesday at 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So come back next week for an episode about the Roswell incident and Area 51. But for now, it's time to close the cover of the Insidious Agenda. I'll see you again next week.